Hi, everybody. Welcome to Drag Racing's Golden Era. As always, we are glad that you're joining us tonight. We have a really special treat for you. Gary Beck is going to be joining us here in just a second to talk about his racing career, his life, and all the cool stuff that went along with it. But before we get to that, Nitro Revival is coming up, Nitro Revival 5. I just got my new order of hats in. The first two people that come up to me and say, "Hey, I want one of your hats out at Nitro Revival," you're going to get one of these. I only ordered a couple of them right now. We'll see if people actually want them. But another exciting thing that happened for us, Gigi Carlton, I was out visiting her and Joe Schubeck. She sent me the book, Hot Rod Empire, the story of Robert Peterson. So we're really looking forward to this. And I want to thank Joe and Gigi for an outstanding time out in Vegas. So enough from me. In our Legends of the Sports series, it's my pleasure now to welcome Gary Beck to the program. Hi, Gary. We're glad that you're with us. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, hi, Reddy. Thanks. It's my pleasure. It's always a lot of fun to talk about drag racing.
I hear you. So the first thing I want to get out of the way, Gary, is that you are not a Canadian. There's a misconception among the passive fans that you were born in Canada, but you were born in Seattle, weren't you?
That's correct. But let me steal a word from our president, Joe Biden. Two words: made in America.
There you go. And you moved up there after you got married. So I just wanted to get that out of the way right up front. So you were born and raised, I assume, in Seattle, right?
Correct. I was born in Seattle, and I raced through the 60s, starting in about 1960, all the way through 1969 in the sportsman classes. And I drove, for the most part, the double B gas dragsters that I was partners with Gaines Markley. And we had other partners of John Rhodes and Mike Sweet also. But I moved to Canada in 1969 and I got married Penny up there in 1969. But my professional career and Top Fuel career is definitely Canadian. And because I met people up there, we can talk about them also. And that, and I raced out of Canada for sure. But the Seattle area was good. It was good to me too. How it all started. If you would like to go through the years there.
Yeah, let's talk about the Emperor's Car Club. Let's start right there with all of that.
That's where it all started in senior in high school. Gaines Markley and I joined the Emperor's Car Club, and what they had was an altered, a 34 Ford two-door altered, and if you had an engine, you put it in it, and then you got to drive it. Well, it took us a few years out of high school before we had an engine, and we built a blown DeSoto and put it in that car, and then Gaines would drive it, and then I'd drive it, and back and forth we went. And we didn't beat anybody particularly with it, but we learned a lot about drag racing. And I know I went 134 miles an hour in that car, and it scared me to death. But from there, we went into the dragsters. We had a little short dragster, couldn't beat anybody with that car either. And we built another car, and that one was very successful. It ran really good. It set the double B gas speed and ET records in 68 and 69. At that time, Gaines moved forward and started driving Top Fuel cars. And well, that, still as partner with me, then I became the sole driver of our car. And actually, we won the Division 6 title, which was Super Eliminator in those days in 1968 and 9. And we had some tough competitors out of Canada. Jack Williams in that Syndicate car. He beat us up pretty good in the early years. And we got back with him in 68 and 69. But Double B Gas was an interesting class around the country. There was about 4 of them around the nation that ran quite well. And we traded national records back and forth because, at Mission and Seattle, the air was real good. And that helped out a Double B gas car. So, in the shorts there, that's, the early years of where it all started for me.
Okay, so I gotta ask you. I've never heard of a DeSoto powered dragster before. And before you guys switched over to the Chrysler Hemi, the DeSoto engine, was it actually manufactured by DeSoto?
Absolutely. We're talking, back in the late 50s, when Chrysler, came out with, first the 333, I think it was, then the 354, then the 392. That was the big engine. But DeSoto, they had their Hemi also, and so did Dodge. Dodge had a smaller engine than we had, but our engine was like, if I remember right, it was 272 cubic inches. And yeah, we had no money. We went to the wrecking yards and got Gaines and I, we knew what the wrecking yard from the front door to the back door. And we bought a short block. We had to build our own manifold, steel manifold. We bought a camshaft, and we bought a Hillborn fuel injection system, and we put pretty much, we ran the stock rods, stock piston, stock crankshaft, and we'd run it maybe 2, 3 races. It would bend a rod, and then we just go back to the wrecking yard to get another short block and put it in there and go race it. You could buy the whole short block for $15, and we were lucky if we had $15, But it ran, and we made a lot of runs. So, it ran pretty good for us. And if we get to talking about my roadster, I copied that motor, my roadster, but it's got a Chrysler in it, because we eventually, the 68 and 69 car had a Chrysler in it. Yeah. It was a 354 with I think we did have a little stroker in it, but it was that car would run in the 8 seconds, somewhere in the mid 8s, I believe, and about 180 miles an hour. Yeah.
Wow. So what was the big difference between double A gas and double B gas? What was it, just engine size, weight, and all that, or what was the difference?
Well, back in those days, NHRA had rules, and it was weight to cubic inch. Yeah. And double B gas dragster was just a little smaller engine. As it happened, when Gaines was driving, he drove for the first part for Jim Crook, who had the Assassin top fuel car. Yeah. Gaines jumped in that and drove that. And Jim Crook had come out of double A gas. He sold his double A gas to Dan Ferguson from Seattle. Well, I drove that. In '69, I drove the double A gas car and the double B car at the same races. I went in '69, I made that car, their car, the double A gas car would run 198, 199 all day long. But we did go 200 with it one time at Arlington Dragway. I went 200 one time with it. And, but it was a real nice, lightweight, double A gas car.
Everybody that lived through that era, and unfortunately I didn't, has fond memories of the top gas class, and it went away in '72, but how exotic some of those cars got. Yours was just a single engine double A?
It was, yeah. There were certainly some 2-engine ones also, but they were pretty. I mean, they were, in the class. The fuel cars were certainly better, but not always. Because they were smoking the tires a lot. And the gas cars would just kind of sneak down there.
Well, I remember they're talking to Bob Moravas about, back then there was, in the early '70s, there was a little bit of confusion sometimes about, top gas cars running faster. And when you had top eliminator, sometimes they were running fuel cars against top gas cars, and there was confusion about who actually won the race.
Well, you're right. In fact, at Arlington, I raced Gaines one time. He was driving the Assassin for Jim Crook, and I was driving Jim's old car, for Dan Ferguson. We decided to run them side by side, and guess who won? The gas car won.
Well, it's a great piece of the history in Top Gas, and I know a lot of people wish Top Gas would have hung around, but I mean, you really didn't need another top dragster class on top of Top Fuel, so I get why it went away.
Well, yes. I mean, it was a good place to start, though. And they were, all front engine cars. And that's really the only front engine cars I've driven because all in my Top Fuel days, it's all rear engine.
Well, let's talk about you married and you moved to Edmonton now. The capital city hot rod club up there in Edmonton. There are some serious names that came out of that hot rod club. Bernie Federley is the first one that comes to mind. Graham Light, was he part of that whole thing too, if I remember right?
Oh, absolutely. I think when I moved up to Edmonton, and I shortly became, a member of the Capital City Hot Rod Club, and became friends with many of them. And I hooked up with Ken McLean, who I became partners with in Top Fuel. But Bernie Federley was part of it. He was working for, racing with Terry Cap, and Graham Light and Dan Sorensen, they purchased Gaines and my double B car. And Graham drove that for a while, and then Ken McLean and I fielded a front engine dragster that Ken drove. We bought the Joker from Calavoda and Hamlin, and Dick Calavoda, John Hamlin, and Ed Norton out of Seattle. They were getting out of racing. We purchased that car, and Ken drove it, and it was a very good Top Fuel car. And so we had that, and as time went on, and we got to the rear engine car, Graham Light and Dan Sorens purchased that front engine car from us. So but Edmonton would field about, I think there were 5 Top Fuel cars in town. And if anybody remembers the Edmonton International Speedway, it was a modern day, we're talking the 1970s here. It was a modern day road course and drag strip facility, hands down to none. They ran Can-Am cars there and stuff. Edmonton was a great city for racing, and then you had Ron Hodgins, he was in funny car, but he had the pacemaker car, has the pacemaker nostalgia car today, and so you had the pacemakers, speed shop, and then you had Terry Cap's Wheeler Dealer speed shop. Then on the south side, there was Jim, I'll think of his name here, on the south. Of course, we didn't like it. Us guys are up there. We didn't like anybody. We're all enemies trying to beat everybody there. Then you got to throw in a couple of cars from Calgary, I think there were, at one time in Alberta, there were 7 Top Fuel cars. So it was very competitive. Egbert and Seaman, they were another one. Maynard Garrity, if you remember that name, Gordon Garrity, they had one. And then the Regals Car Club, Phil Broderick, they had gas car. They had a double B gas car for years, but they also fielded a fuel car for a little bit, But it was amazing.
It is amazing because if you think about it, these days you got to have millions of dollars in the bank just to be able to field a race team out on the road. And back then, put a few guys together and go racing with a Top Fuel car. It was an amazing time. I mean, there was fuel cars everywhere, it seemed like.
Well, you're right. And, for an interesting, on the Canadian side, there was one year, 5 cars from Edmonton went to the Grand Nationals in Montreal. 4 of them qualified. There was an 8-car show then. 4 of them qualified. For years, Edmonton had half the field of an NHRA national event. And nowadays, with everybody moving to Brownsburg, Indiana, that has changed. But for years, Edmonton had half of a field. Yeah, it was something.
So I guess the next thing that comes to mind, you guys had the Joker, but then we're moving on. We're getting into 72 here. How did you, I mean, you were a chief mechanic at that point, right? You weren't actually in the driver's seat. How did you end up in the driver's seat?
Well, you're right. Ken McLean and I fielded the front engine car. He drove, and he was very good. He was a very good driver, and I was crew chief. And as time went on, the rear engine cars were coming into play, and Ken and I had Bob Lawrence, if you remember that name, because he was part of Edmonton's racing. He ran the Lawrence Custom Brokers, and he became our sponsor. So we decided, that we would have purchase a rear engine car in 1972, which we did. And Ken drove it starting at the Winter Nationals at Pomona in 1972. And he drove that car till, I'm going to call it mid-season. But he had some issues with that, being consistent with that car. Let me just say, we added Ray Peets as a sponsor at that point in time. And, he had his reliable engine services. So our car was well funded, and it was a very good race car. It was Beck, McLean, Lawrence, and Reliable Engines as a sponsor. And at Ray's shop, we built our own engines, mostly the crankshafts. We did our own stroker crankshafts right at Reliable Engines. So we fielded a very good race car. Well, Ken had some tough times driving that car. I mean, he was capable, but he just couldn't focus. And late in the year, we had a team meeting, and we needed to make a change. Okay. Ken says, well, if I'm not driving, I want out. Okay, so Bob Lawrence and I purchased Ken's share of the car. So now we got this great race car and no driver. So we're going to look, and we were considering bringing somebody in, and then Bob and I talked, well, maybe I'll take a run at it. And if we don't see success in a few races, we'll get somebody else. But let's just get started. Well, I had to upgrade my license. So I went out to Edmonton International Speedway. I had to do a 3-run upgrade to get my license. Well, on the 3rd run, we set the track record at Edmonton Speedway. Now, you got to remember, top rear engine cars were brand new, so the record was achievable. And we went out there with that car, and then we went to Seattle Division 6 points race. And I qualified there, and then Hank Johnson gave me a lesson on the starting line, and he knocked me out first round. And so, but we were going to go to Indy. So, well, what are we going to do? Well, let's go to Indy and just, let's go one more. We had all the plans to go to Indy. So we go to Indy. There was, I don't know, 70 some cars qualifying for 32 spots, and we qualified 10th. And we went round by round through that 32 car show, 5 rounds on one day. And Ray Peets was there with a couple of his workers from Reliable Engines, and we raced Jerry Ruth in the final, and he smoked the tires, and I run 6:11 and won the race. And I guess the rest is history.
Well, Jerry Ruth, Seattle Northwest native. Had you had much contact with him before the 72 Nationals?
Well, yes. I mean, we raced Jerry a lot. I say we, Ken McLean driving, and then in the Sportsman, when Jerry first started drag racing, he was in the comp preliminary, I think. and super eliminator and comp eliminator where we were, oftentimes they raced each other also. Ruth had a C altered, I believe it was, or no, maybe C gas. It was a gas car. It had a Chevrolet in it, but shortly, somewhere in the early mid '60s, he went into Top Fuel, and then we raced him. So I certainly knew all the Division 6 racers as well as they knew who I was. We were no. I mean, at the Indy race, I also raced Herm Peterson. Well, you race Herm Peterson and Jerry Ruth, it was just like on Old Home Week. But we did win that race, and that changed things considerably because we competed at Ontario, which was the Super Nationals, and then we went to Lyons drag strip for the last drag race, December 2nd, 1972. I qualified there and I put it in the sand trap. And we had to take the car to Woody Gilmore's chassis shop and do a little repair, back to the track. And I beat Cerny and Moody first round and threw the clutch out of it. Sawed the car up. Pretty bad, actually. So then I called Bob Lawrence, who was partners, and Ray Pete still sponsored. And I tell Bob, he says, I've already heard, I quit. So here I am, Penny and I, in the Marco Polo Hotel in Anaheim, California, with a broken race car. Partner just quit. And what are we going to be doing? Well, over serious talks over the winter, Ray bought Bob Lawrence out and became owner of the team. I maintained a small portion, but he owned most of the team. And we rebuilt the car and more motors, and that's when it became Beck and Pete's. And for 1973. And then we went on to the U.S. Nationals again, and we won. We won back to back. But then it was still sponsored by Reliable Engine, but it was Beck and Pete's, at that time, and it remained that way all the way through the '70s.
So I want to step back just a second here because there's two things that come to mind. First of all, in '72. I don't remember how many years that PRA race went on in Tulsa, but NHRA Garlitz was trying to give NHRA a run for their money with the PRA race. And how do you? I know that people said the '72 season because of the PRA race was a weird season, but I mean, you clearly showed everybody that you weren't just a one-hit wonder at the '72 race. How do you think that? How did that PRA race affect the U.S. Nationals that year? The car counts, were they where they were supposed to be? How did it really affect that race?
Well, it certainly did. I don't know how many cars were at Tulsa, but there were still 70 cars. Yeah. I think it was 72 actually that tried to qualify at U.S. Nationals, and it could have knocked the edge off a little bit. But, Don Perdome was there with his car, as was Tom McEwen. But they ran the dragsters at Indy, and they ran their funny cars down in Tulsa. But it certainly would have made some difference. But Loey T, I think, was until Ruth ran was. Clayton Harris, I think he ran like 6:03, something like that. I ran 6:21. And the bump spot was pretty high. I forget, but something in the high sixes, I imagine. But it's still, I mean, it was a it was a full field of cars, no matter how you look at it. Yeah.
Well, the other thing that I had Larry Brown on when we chatted with him. He goes, yeah, and then that upstart, we were down in Tulsa, and that upstart Gary Beck comes in and wins. He goes, and even Larry said, but that man backed up everything he did at the U.S. Nationals. But I want to ask you about, because Lions that last race at Lions it's just a special deal to me, and having a personal relationship with Carl Olson it's been really cool. The neat thing about that race, Gary, is you actually beat Don Moody, and on the break rule, Don Moody continued on and should have technically been in the final round of that race.
No, you're right. You're right. Carl and I've talked a little bit about it, but Moody got back in, but I think he ran Carl Olson in the second round, if I remember right. It was
No,
I
Don,
might be wrong.
what happened was Don Moody actually just pulled. I mean, the whole race turned into such a freak show that he was supposed to race Carl Olson in the finals. And what happened was, because he had beat Jeb Allen, they brought Jeb Allen back in on the break rule. Moody told, I don't know who was running it, Steve Evans or whatever, that he was out. So they brought Jeb Allen in. So realistically, it could have been, had you not broken, it could have been you in the final against Carl Olson.
Yeah, maybe, but it may be. But I was a rookie, trying to make a living. I that's the only time I was at Lions, was one time in the last drag race, and I thought I got my money's worth. I hit we qualified, we won, we did win one round, and I also went in the sand trap. I got it all, So they got their 50th anniversary coming up, and they're having a function up at the museum up, and I might go, I'm not sure, but there's certainly a legendary place to visit. There was no doubt about that.
Well, did you manage to hang around after? Did you go sit in the stands and watch the rest of the race with all the with everything that was going on up there?
Well, I believe so. I remember how wild it was. I don't think I could have got into the stands, but I was probably part of the crowd, standing around. It was mayhem, no doubt about it.
All right. So anyway, you win the U.S. Nationals in 72. We can, fast forward to 73. And all of a sudden, here's Gary Beck again. This wasn't a one-hit wonder. You're back, and in '73, you're winning again. How did you guys rebuilt the car after 72? Tell me about all that. 73.
Well, the 73 season was interesting, because now I'm driving, and we go to from Edmonton. Back in that era, in 73, the championship was a combination of the division points races, and there were 8 national events at that time. And the winner, the division winners and a few other cars would go to the world finals. And it was for, the world champion was the winner of the world finals race. Well, Indy was part of the circuit, and we ran national events a little bit on the limited basis, but we did get to Indy. And of course, Indy was, now Garlett's was at Indy, they were there. Well, Gartz's car, actually, my car was running pretty good. I forget where I qualified. It wasn't number one, but it was down in, we were 10th in 72. We wanted to get in the top 8, the grouping, and still a 32 car show. And we did that. I remember with that, we did that. Well, Garlett's wasn't running all that well, but in the news, interviews with, some of the media there, he said, well, I want to race Beck. I'm trying to time myself to where I'm racing Beck. Well, guess what? We raced first round, and I beat him first round. And I remember that race. I mean, it was a good race. Um, you know, I'm going to say wheel to wheel, but I had a good top end charge and it moved out on him a little bit, and I beat him. And down at the other end, we're down there side by side, and that's really my first meeting with Garlits. And you know, he just said, "Nice top end charge," and walked off. That was it. But then we marched our way through the field, and then raced, Carl Olson in the final. So
Well,
and
and let's talk about that, because Carl Olson, when we did our interview with him, he specifically talked about that. What he said was, and I know you know this because you've talked with him many times about this, but what he said for all of you out there.
Anyway, we went up there and staged and left, and he kind of I saw him pull out a little bit on me, and then he just immediately disappeared, and I knew he had smoked the tires. Not my first rodeo. I've seen that before. Guy disappears that quick. He is either shut off or he's lost traction, And for the next couple of seconds, I'm counting contingency money and wondering who the trophy girl is going to be this year. And, I would say probably the 1,200 foot mark and the 1,320 foot drag strip, I saw his front wheel. And by the time we got to the ET light, he had gone by me and won the race. And I was gutted, absolutely gutted. I still chide myself to this day for assuming that I was about to win the biggest drag race on the planet.
no, he says he was counting the win money, and no, that's true. But they had the 392, the Donovan aluminum motor back then, and we had the late model Chrysler. Now it was all cast iron heads and cast iron block, but we had our reliable engine in there, and we had Ray would produce our own stroker crankshafts. And that was a 426 Chrysler. Well, when it was most people had the 426 stock crankshafts. Well, we had a little stroker in ours. I think we started out with a 1/4-inch stroker. So then when the sport went to 1/4-inch strokers, we went to 3/8. When the sport went to 3/8, we went to half. And when the sport went to half, we went to 5/8. And we always had more cubic inches than most of the other cars out there. And we had a very good race car, and some well-qualified crew that came down from Reliable Engines, Ray's employees, and we were able to maintain that engine. Ray was very particular on the cylinder heads. He gave me tools to take on the road to keep the valve job in order, a vacuum gauge to make sure everything was seated properly. And he was a production engine rebuilder. That was his business. I might have taught him a little bit about drag racing, but they were teaching me a heck of a lot about engine work. And just basic stuff that keeps an engine working. So the cylinder heads were always good, and then he was very particular about the ring seal. And so we had equipment to hone the cylinders on at the track and take care of them. The rings, he had the production rings and bearings from his suppliers through that, and we were able to feed the car enough parts. We ran it hard. We put the percent to it, and we had work to do on it, but we were capable of handling it, and that kept the car competitive, and that's why it ran so as good as it was. And then I got hooked up with people like Schaefer clutches, and we had we were kind of led the charge. Back in those days, it was Hayes clutch versus Schaefer clutch, and we had the whole Hearst operation, because they had numerous companies, and it was all part of our team. We had a lot going on for us.
Well,
Yeah.
and you bring up a good point about this era of racing. Drivers didn't just fly in on a helicopter and jump in the car and race on race weekend. You guys all had to be wrenching on these motors. Everybody had to know every part of the team. And another thing we've kind of lost in drag racing these days.
Well, you're right. My expertise was a drag race mechanic. I'm not I could hardly open up the hood on your street car, but I can work on a dragster, but we did it all, from the rear ends to the front, for the drivetrain to the engine, top to bottom. We did it all, and you had to, and so did the people we raced against. I mean, Jerry Ruth, for example, Don Garlitz, they could do it all also, and that's how we raced. And you're right, it is certainly different today. It's very specialized out there.
Yeah.
No doubt about that.
So how many in 73 you guys won the US Nationals? How many other national events did you guys pick off that year? Was that the only one?
Yeah, so my first two Wallies are the US Nationals, back to back. And then in 73, we won Division 5, and so we went to the World Finals, and we raced it was in Amarillo, Texas.
Yep.
And we ran there and got to the final against Jerry Ruth, and he beat me by 20 feet and became world champion that year. So I lost a championship by 20 feet there, but
So
that was the last year that it was one race. It became a series in 1974, which I won in 74.
So let me ask you about Division 5. When you were in Canada, were you racing in Division 5? Was that your division?
It was.
Okay,
yes.
So you were not Division. So why was I thinking you were Division 6?
Well, I am a Division 6 driver.
Okay.
But going to national events and going back home to Edmonton, and then a Canadian car, we wanted to run, the Canadian races as much as possible also. And there was a division race in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And then Denver was not a bad run to get down to Denver. And so we didn't run, we ran only very few Division 6 point races.
Okay.
But in division titles, back in that era, I actually won 4 division titles, 2 in Division 5, 1 in Division 1, and the last one was Division 4.
Wow.
Yeah.
So,
but
you're racing all over.
Well, you had to, have a schedule and bookings and a reasonable route. Well, Division 6 in the opposite corner of the country from what we're trying to do here, So we were on the road a lot, But let me tell you how I booked the car.
Yeah.
Because it is kind of interesting, as to how you're doing. But now, of course, national events, I mean, you weren't bought in or anything. I mean, it was your dime to go to a national event. But the division races, I could make a deal with the promoter of those races, and what I asked for was the win money. I wanted a guarantee of the win money, and if I won the race, it didn't cost them anything. If I lost first round, yeah, it cost them a few bucks, but I would also give them 1 day of promotional work prior to the race. I would come in, do 1 day of promotional work, guaranteed to win money. And we won plenty of division races. So, that was kind of, how we operated, and that helped knowing, I've often said there's only three ways to fund a race car, prize money, sponsor money, and your money. Well, the your money we didn't do, we tried to do it with the first two,
Well, I grew up in the 70s, and the whole match race circuit and all the match races. I lived just up the road from Great Lakes Dragway down here in Union Grove, Wisconsin, and man, everybody came through there at one point or another. And
I've been there.
Yeah, that facility in my mind was, at least in this area, was quintessential drag racing for us. And just because it was a track that I could get to, and I saw everybody there. Everybody was there at some point. I probably saw you there.
Yeah. Well, I know I've been there.
Yeah. So, but the match race circuit, I know a lot of you guys, that's how you funded your operation to be able to even go to the national events, isn't that?
Oh, absolutely. And you had to match race. We ran AHRA, IHRA, and the NHRA. Of course, the NHRA was the main stream, the main part of it, but we ran many races. I actually won 4 IHRA national events, and I think it's 7 AHRA races along the way. We ran, in Michigan, we ran that popular hot rod race a fair amount too, and that helped fund it. And then there's the ones in Chicago. There, it's actually Gary, Indiana, out of Chicago there. We ran that one. It was exciting, but I did a fair amount of match racing, nothing like Garlitz or Tommy Ivo did, and even Muldowney, other than in Canada, I did a lot of match races at the Canadian tracks through the 70s with the Expert A sponsorship, and then the Thrush sponsorship were both Canadian companies. There were, and back, let me just throw this in. When we bought that car way back when, we were using Canadian money. Canadian money was 10% higher than US. Oh. So it was a good deal.
Well, so in 74, I mean, you win 3 NHRA events, you win 2 AHRA events. It was a good year. I mean, to me, it's amazing that you stepped into the car in 72, win the US Nationals, win it again in 73, and in 74, you're winning all kinds of stuff. It was a good 3-year run right there. And was that all still in 74? Was that still with Pete's, or were you already over to McDonald Tobacco Company?
Well, no, Ray Pete's owned the car.
Okay.
But he says, we're going to get a major sponsor. He says, I'm going after McDonald Tobacco, which was Export A. And I said, well, good luck, well, he pursued it, and he put it together, and we didn't have Expert A at the Winter Nationals of 74, but we did shortly after that. And which was a real start, and pretty good sponsorship money, but mainly a huge promotional program. They assigned 2 of their marketing people just to work with us, and I was busy all the time in Canada. Now we're talking in Canada, and I'd race in Canada, but race in the US on these circuits we're talking about, but back to Canada for shows. We had all kinds of trade shows, some of them not even connected with cars. And we had, because they Expert A that's a cigarette company. A lot of people thought it was beer, but it wasn't. It was a cigarette company, and owned by RJR too.
Oh, I didn't know that. I did not know that.
No, they were owned by RJR, but Winston didn't start till 75, but we're talking 74, year before. and we win the championship with them first year, you know, and it was a great promotion, and we were all over Canada doing things at car shows and trade shows and the drag racing, and you know, and it was a great marketing program, and we carried it into 75, and we had that completed the contract, and we had 76 and on in paper that we were discussing with them. And that's when the Canadian government clamped down on the cigarette companies, and all of Expert A's marketing went away. It wasn't just us in drag racing, but they got out of, had to get out of everything, and that ended that. I mean that they closed down the marketing department, which had a couple of dozen people in it, and like in a day they were gone. And then we were scrambling. We didn't know it, and we were scrambling, and we were able to put the thrush program together.
Well, with the Export A, I came across I don't know if you want to call it amazing or funny, one of your promotional deals for Export A. You were actually on a road course with a top fuel dragster. Why don't you tell us about that? It was hilarious.
Yeah. It's a great story because it was one of the deals. We went around Mossport, which is in between. It's south of Toronto, towards London, Ontario, and we're going there on a NASCAR weekend, and we're just there in the pits with the NASCAR guys, and the NASCAR guys, they really don't want to associate with the drag racing guys, you know, and but they brought in a couple of their drivers. But anyway, we're there, and we're going to do a lap. You know, they're on the PA. Well, Gary's going to get out there and is going to do a fire burnout and he's going to go around the track. All right. So I'm there with my crew, Ron Capps. I call him the real Ronnie. It's not the funny car driver Ronnie Capps.
Yep.
I'm call him the real Ronnie Capps. We're there, and of course nobody would talk to us, but that's okay. So we go. It's our turn. So we talk about it, and I said, well, I'm gonna kind of leg it a little bit. Okay. So we load this thing up with fuel, and we push start it, and Ronnie puts a little gasoline down near the starting line, and we do a fire burnout. Well, I keep going, and I go down towards turn 1, and I'm in their NASCAR groove, and I leg it, and it's moving pretty good. So a dragster has good brakes also. You know, you got the big tire, you got good brakes. So I anchor the brakes. So I come around turn 1, and I'm in the groove. So I jump on the throttle. Well, it hikes the front end up. Zoom, you go down, and then, you know, and I don't forget exactly how the track was. You know, some lefts, some rights, and I'm just kind of skipping. And I see that we got bike wheels on the front, and I see the wheels kind of sidetracking a little bit, you know, and they're just kind of move. Gary, that's a little too hot, you know. So I kind of cool it a little bit. But I can't. Every time I had a chance, I legged it. Well, a dragster is really quick, and you go to the corner. Yeah, you got to slow in the corners. Well, I get down to the hairpin, and I go around the hairpin kind of slow, and I'm looking for the push truck. Well, the push truck ain't anywhere near there. So I pull off into the kind of the debris from the track. And there's a grandstand there. So I do another burnout. So and I'm going down left, right, up over the hill, and I'm legging it pretty good, really good. I mean, it's carrying the wheels every time I jump on it. Through the S's, I pull the parachute, you know, and I've last couple of corners, and I get to the round of I'm trying to stop, and it's starting to run out of fuel when I'm on the brakes. And I get it to the finish line, and the announcer says, Well, you're not going to believe this, but Gary just went around there. It was 2 tenths behind what the NASCAR guys were lapping the track. And 2 tenths. Well, I can tell you, a lot of people don't want to believe that, but that's what I was told. But if I had any idea it was that close, I would have not stopped, for one thing, and maybe not used the parachutes. But it was that good. But a dragster is so fast and the groove is so good that I mean, I believe. Well, when I came around and stopped at the finish line, the NASCAR guys were all up the guardrail.
I figured they wouldn't talk to you anymore after that.
No, they were all like this. Well, the story even goes farther on, because a few weeks later we went to the oval track in London, Ontario. And there's another one, do a fire burnout, go around, same thing. We're out in the middle. It's the Canadian version of NASCAR, one of their lower classes, same thing. Where our trailer's out there, they're not talking to us at anything. But anyway, it's our turn. Saturday night, I guess. Ronnie, we're going to do a fire burnout. So we push start it, get to the starting line, fire burnout, and down towards turn one I go. I'm going down towards turn one. They turn the lights out because they want to see the header flames. Well, I can't see turn one. So I'm giving it a little throttle, trying to get some header flames up so I can see turn one. I kind of sneak it around turn one, kind of around turn two a little. I sneak it around turn two. And then they turn the lights back on. And coming out of turn two, I nail it. Well, it hikes the front end up about 3 feet. And down the back chute I go, and into turn three and around to forward stop. Again, the NASCAR guys, because the car is so quick. I mean, a dragster, you're talking a top fuel dragster here, back in those days, maybe 2,500 horsepower, in that range, 2,000 for sure, and I mean, they're so quick. And the groove is good. I mean, you're dealing with a good groove. You're not out there spinning the tires. And yeah, it was something.
I heard what I heard from about that was, but what you just talked about was that the crowd went absolutely wild when you came back up across the starting line.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, I mean, Canadians are great automotive fans for a start. And what they enjoyed it, but that was an Export A promotion. That's the kind of things we did, and everywhere we went, they would get involved in the press conferences. And, we did burnouts in hotel parking lots, all across Canada, and some of them in the streets, and we, in downtown Vancouver, BC at lunchtime in front of the sports club. They blocked the street off, and we did a burnout at lunchtime with people hanging out the windows of the big tall buildings. I mean, we're rattling it. You got a top fuel dragster downtown, for crying out loud, But it was something, Well, here's a good one. Same thing in Calgary. At the sports club, we're promoting a race up there for G. McMahon at Calgary. And we do another burnout downtown Calgary. Well, then stopping, you're bouncing and carrying. I hit a manhole cover with the oil pan, and I stopped the car. Well, there's a big old puddle of oil coming out. Brent Seaman was crew chief at that time. This was a Thrush car, and I get out. I got to go in and talk to the media people, right? Hey, Brent, take care of this. It was a mess.
But these are the stories that I just, the unvarnished stuff that went on in drag racing back then. It's just great stories. So so you lose Export A as a sponsor in the 75 season. I assume you came in with Thrush, as I recall, on the car. Is that right?
Well, it'd be 76. Thrush was
76.
74 and 5.
Okay, so
And
75 was a hell of a season for you, as I recall.
well, that's the battle with Garland.
Yeah, and I remember, and I talked to Herm Peterson about this a few times, and the whole thing with the Garlot's offering a bounty at the World Finals and all that. It was quite a season. But we all know how that ended out. That ended up being what Garlot's first world championship in that year. But why don't you talk about the 75 season? That was a battle all the way through that season.
Well, it really was. Again, we had a very competitive car, and the season started, and we're reasonably successful getting going, and so was Garlot's. But Garlot's wanted to win the NHRA World Championship and the IHRA champion at the same time. Well, I booked my car to run 4 only races with IHRA, Larry Carrier. Now, the contract was all verbal. Everything was over the phone. And I agreed to go to 4 races for Larry Carrier, IHRA races. Now, Garlot's was doing them all. And into the year, NHRA announces they're having a race. They're adding a race to their season. They're adding the Seattle race, the Northwest Nationals.
Yep.
Well, and it was on top of the Bristol IHRA event, one of the ones that I had made a deal to go to with Larry Carrier. So 2 things. I'm running for the NHRA championship, and I want to run pretty much a hometown track, being in Seattle. So I call Larry Carrier, explain what's going on with what my wants would be, and so I traded Bristol for the race he had at, I believe, Amarillo, Texas. So I go, and that was much earlier in the season also. So I go to Amarillo, I race that race. And so that completed my 4 events with Larry Carrier, and he agreed, and he was fine. Well, because I was, and Don Garlot's, we were the 2 battling for the NHRA championships. Garlot's won. He said, well, you've got to, Gary was supposed to go to Bristol. Yeah. Well, you got to make him come to Bristol. They were going to sue me, which they did. And Carrier, he called me and he says, Gary, you got to come to Bristol. I said, well, I can't. I said, we had a deal. I went to your 4 races. He said, yeah, you went to the 4 races, but you got Garlot's, he demands you come to Bristol because you said you were going to go to Bristol in the first of the year. Well, I said, well, I'm not, Well, they sued me, and that suit was eventually thrown out of court after numerous years. Now, this is all verbal contract stuff we're talking about here. There was nothing on paper. But I went to Seattle, and they got an injunction for me to not race. I was served papers in Seattle from Larry Carrier. Well, I raced anyway, and we won that race, and took over the lead of the championship, took the lead away from Garlot's.
Wow.
So we were leading going into the final race. Well, what happened was after a long legal battle, I won the lawsuit was nothing because I had completed the contract.
Yeah.
But I still had this problem with the injunction that they got at a federal court, and I had to. I was charged with contempt of court, which is a judge's way of policing his court. If a judge tells you to do something, you have to do it, or you're in contempt of court. So I had to go to Tennessee and go to federal court, and I had my day in court, and I was found guilty of contempt of court in the state of Tennessee, and I had to pay $1,000 fine.
Oh.
But that took a couple of years to resolve.
Yeah.
I'm not real happy with what went on through that process. Larry Carrier and the judge were able to have every court date on Friday of an NHRA national event. Somehow, some way,
Yeah.
you know. But it is what it is today, you know. The battle that year with Garlits was tense. Garlits won the championship. The $1,000 bounty that he put up at numerous races. I disagree with the sportsman factor of that.
Yeah.
It turned people into trying to win a drag race by any means but performance.
Yeah.
And that is not very sportsmanlike to me. Garlits, we raced for that championship at Ontario, California. I qualified number one with the first 5.69, first time in the 60s car. That was my only 60s. Garlits had trouble qualifying for a while. Then he did qualify, and then he ran, I think, a 67. And then in the final, I think it was against Herm.
Yeah, it was Herm Peterson.
He ran 63 for the national record, and he beat me by. So Garlits won the race and the world championship. He beat me by a round or a little more.
Yeah.
Because Herm had beat me that race, which is another story. But I look at that season a little bit different these days.
Yeah.
I raced Garlits in the final in Montreal. He beat me in Montreal. I raced Garlits. It was, I think, the next race was the Summer Nationals in Englishtown. I raced Garlits in, I think it was the third round, might have been second, but third round. I beat him there. He had to go to one more points race, which was in Suffolk, Virginia. I went there to race him to stop him. And we talked about Garlits at Indy trying to qualify against me. I went there particularly to qualify against him. Well, he qualified number one, and I was sandbagging it. And back in those 8-car show, back in those days, one races 5. Well, I end up number 5. And I raced Garlits first round, which is exactly what I wanted to do, and knock him out. Well, he beat me. So the Ontario part of the story kind of ends the story, but realistically, those 3 races were a huge part where you got to race who you were competing with head to head, because we really didn't race each other very often. You know, we'd either get beat by somebody else or whatever. We never ran head to head. But if you take Montreal, Englishtown, and his points race, those were big factors. And he beat me 2 out of 3 there. And then the end was at Ontario. It could have gone either way at Ontario. I would have liked to have raced him at Ontario. It would have been a great thing for the fans to have 2 560, the only 2 560 cars race each other in the final. But I needed to beat Herm Peterson, and that didn't happen.
So did the 75 season, did it tarnish your view of drag racing at that point, or did you come out of it? How'd you come out of that season? Were you okay with moving forward?
Oh yes. The lawsuit part of it went on for 2 years. Before it was really finalized. But the competitive side of it only makes you tougher.
Well, and there's no doubt about it, Gary. That was hardcore competition. Garlits wanted to kick your butt all over the place for whatever reason.
Well, in the early days of racing Garlits, I beat him a lot. In the later years, he beat me a lot. He uses the words and I use them too. He was a formidable opponent. You had to go there. I beat him at AHRA and I beat him at IHA races. I beat him at the final round at an IHA race in Akron, Ohio. I forget what that track was called, but I beat him in the final there, and it was Ronnie Cap, so it was 74 or 5. It must have been 75. And we're pitted not very close to Garlits, but his crew guy, Red was his name. Forget his last name. He comes over and he gives Ronnie and I a beer out of Garlits' cooler. Congratulates us on knocking him off, Well, Don sees that. He didn't like that one bit. Well, when Red got back to the trailer, he got the torque wrench out and he's chasing him around, trying to beat him over the head with a damn torque wrench. He's chasing him around the race car and the trailer. He's, don't you ever be doing that? Hey, it was just competition.
I'll tell you what it did do, Gary, is it for us as fans out here, it made for some intense racing. It was on your feet racing, when you guys came to the line.